Tell your mom that Instagram is not working. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome again to another edition of Through My Eyes with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. As we said a few weeks ago, the month of August we've dedicated to what we call the Diplomacy Masterclass, which is where, again, we hear the professor share his views on some of the international events going on across the world, and will also bring some insight into how you may apply some of these principles in your own environment where you find yourself. But before we go on, as we always do, we want to thank you all for joining, all the comments that come in on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram. We appreciate all your comments. Please keep the comments coming and do share the link with your friends. Let them join in and let's get this conversation going on. Prof, you're welcome to the show again this evening.
Thank you very much.
All right. Last week, we had some questions that we didn't get to. And there's one of them in particular that, Prof, we feel would be important for you to respond to. And the question was this: that with the withdrawal of the United States from global arrangements like the Paris Climate Agreement and more recently WHO, is the US losing its position as a world power?
Well, that's quite obvious that the consequence of this anti-globalization and anti-international institution posture by the Trump administration is not to the benefit of the United States, and it's not to the benefit of the world, incidentally. Both are losers, or I should say, all of us are losers. The values that the United States has sought to promote internationally had not been done unilaterally. The United States had been successful because it had done so in conjunction with its allies through these international institutions. It is by far easier for countries and peoples and other systems to accept values sponsored by the United States if the sponsorship is through the instrumentalities of these international institutions. When the United States withdraws from that, we must admit that the international institutions themselves lose their potency. It makes transmission and adoption of values that much more difficult because nobody wants to be seen as succumbing to American initiatives which are being unilaterally pursued. The US must recognize that there is a linkage between its global leadership position and its membership of international institutions. The values of benefit to the world. That's why they have been adopted in the first place. Even when the United States has not been in favor, it has been difficult for the United States, as an illustration, to refuse to embrace environmentalism when this is being pursued through the instrumentality of international institutions. So it hasn't been a one-way diplomatic activity. But when the United States pulls out, distances itself from international institutions, it weakens. That very act of distancing itself weakens the international institutions. But it also diminishes American global leadership position. And since the international system abhors a vacuum, it allows other global players, because the time is long gone when the United States was this global player that everybody succumbs to. There are other competing global players now. It allows them to try to move in to fill the vacuum left by the United States. Obviously, they haven't got to that stage where they command international acceptability. People still see them with some form of suspicion. People are still not prepared to grant them, and I'm talking about the new global players, to grant them the same type of respect that that they've granted the United States. For example, it's an illustration. Look at the conflict now over what I will call the vaccine candidate. Russians said they've produced a vaccine. I'm yet to meet any non-Russian scientist who has bought into that. That's why I call it vaccine candidate rather than a vaccine itself. Whereas if it has been a United States vaccine, even though there may be some suspicion that things are being hurried, people will be prepared to give the US the benefit of doubt because of its leadership position, which they will not give Russia now. But with America going it alone, it diminishes American status.
Well, we see that obviously the elections are around the corner in the United States. Is there anything you think the US can do to regain its position in that leadership position? And secondly, how difficult would it be for them to return to some of these agreements that they have exited?
Those are two questions in one. The first one is whether there is any possibility of the United States reversing itself. And the answer would be yes, if the Biden-Harris ticket wins in November. They have, in fact, sent out signals to the world that they will reverse some of the ill-thought policies of the Trump administration. And I can see them going back to the WHO. I can see them re-embracing the environmental agreement, the climate change Paris Agreement. I could see them embracing that. Whether they will go back simpliciter to the Iranian agreement, I will doubt it. I think what the what the Biden-Harris administration will do will probably look for another diplomatic way, another diplomatic effort, assisted by its allies, especially since Biden was part of the administration that negotiated the initial deal. They will try to look at another way to come up with the same kind of agreement with some fine-tuning to assuage actually the pride of the United States.
But
However,
do you see this being a priority for them at all? And should it
oh,
be a priority?
oh yes, it will be it is going to be a priority for if Biden Harris and a team wins, going back to the international community will be a priority, especially because right now we are faced with a global pandemic on our hand. Going it alone, even under Trump, it's not going to be the way out. And I think that it actually will be a benefit to the Biden-Harris administration that there is a global pandemic. It will make them that easier to walk back into some form of globalization.
Okay, we talk about the Biden Harris combination. Were you surprised by Biden's pick for his vice presidential candidate?
Yes, I was surprised. The reason being that there had been a clash during the Democratic primaries between uh, uh, Harris and Biden. Biden was very hurt by the abrasiveness of Kamala Harris. He even said so that it hurt him. Not only what she said, but the way she said it. It hurt him also because there had been a close family relationship between the Biden family and the Harris family because of the relationship between Kamala and Beau, the late son of Biden, which is still a very sore, sensitive issue for Joe Biden. And he almost saw it as a betrayal of that special relationship between his son Beau and Kamala Harris. I also understand that even his wife, that is Biden's wife, felt the same way. So I thought, well, I didn't put my money on Kamala Harris at all. Number two, her personality, I just thought was too strong compared with the personality of Joe Biden. So I was quite surprised. And as you know, in most other parts of the world, in fact, let us take places where they practice parliamentary democracy. If there's a leadership contest, the man who wins that leadership contest, the people he usually gets rid of when making up his cabinet are the people who ran against him. So I was surprised, and I think it says a lot about the character and the personality of Joe Biden. That this was a man who put the interests of the state way above his own personal interest in whatever way he may feel about Kamala Harris. I think he came to the conclusion that she would be an asset in running the United States, and that was the important thing. So I
Do
was
you
quite
think
surprised.
those sharp differences during the primaries would make their way into the White House should they win?
Oh no, no, no. The Americans, the system knows how to handle this situation. I mean, if I can give you a few examples, um, um, Kennedy and Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, didn't get along at all during their primaries. But Kennedy felt he needed Johnson. And when they got to the White House, there was no doubt that the Kennedys put Johnson in his place. And probably what rescued Johnson was the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Look at Reagan and the elder Bush. If you recall, during their primary conflict, the elder Bush referred to Reagan's economic plan as voodoo economics, and yet he picked him as his VP, and there was no conflict at all between them. Then even Biden was very sarcastic about Barack Obama during the campaign. And yet, after he picked him, in fact, that's probably the best combination that you could say had been in American history. A lot of respect was shown by Barack Obama towards Biden, and or I should say, Biden showed a lot of respect for Barack Obama, and Barack Obama reciprocated the respect. So I don't expect, if you look at the American Constitution, believe me, no function was given to the vice president apart from presiding over the Senate if there was likely to be, a cliffhanger of a vote in the Senate. That's really the only function that was spelled out there. It's only where something happens, and that was an amendment to the Constitution, that the vice president then comes into his own. So I don't expect at all that there will be a conflict between the two.
And before we move away from this US topic, given we now know who the candidates are for the Democrats, do you think that picking Kamala Harris has enhanced the chances of Biden actually winning the election? Will that combination appeal to the American people?
Well, if you are looking for a concrete answer to your question, look at how much, since he announced Kamala Harris as the vice presidential Democratic candidate, look how much has been raised within 24 hours, which to me is, the Americans, they usually put their money where their mouth is. I often even say they put their money where their heart is. So if that volume of funds, donations that are coming within 24 hours, I don't know whether it's said 24 million or some such figure. Anyway, as somebody said, in 24 hours, the Biden campaign pulled in more than it did at times on a monthly basis during the primaries. It showed how America has embraced the nomination. But let me also add, the world has also embraced this nomination. And I think that is because of the personality of Kamala Harris. You know who she reminds me of? She reminds me of Jacqueline Kennedy, in the sense that she's charming, and let's not put a fine point on it. She's attractive, she's beautiful, and people feel she'll bring grace and charm into the White House. And in portraying, it makes it easier for the rest of the world to go back and embrace America again after the debacle of the past 4 years of the Trump administration. A point that has been lost in all the things that have been said in the past 24 hours has been this. And please permit me to expand it a little bit before coming specifically to her. President Obama was a Luo from Kenya. A Luo has never been president of Kenya since independence. They've just never been allowed. It's been a marginalized group in Kenya. If you look at the mother of Kamala Harris, she's Indian from the Southeast Asia, Tamil background. They are not a major player in Indian politics. And to that extent, even though they are now embracing their daughter, I think until this issue of her nomination, I don't think Indians really regarded Kamala Harris as their daughter. Right now, there is a suit, a law case against an American corporation where an Indian of, well, colored skin, let's call it that way, has sued the corporation because she said she was discriminated against by fellow Indians within the organization who were lighter in color, in skin color than her, that she was not allowed to bloom according to her talent. That's a diplomatic way of saying that the racial discrimination that colored people suffer in India makes them a discriminated against class. And yet, here she is now in a position to become the number 2 citizen in the United States. So I will not be surprised if America now is back to fulfilling its role as to use Reagan's language, the shining light on the cliff that attracts people who are discriminated against, people who are despised in their own countries, and yet they bloom when they come to the United States. I think that this is the monumental significance of the nomination of Kamala Harris to the rest of the world. Obviously, the Americans welcome every opportunity to tell the world we are not what Trump has portrayed us to be. We are a better country, a better nation. Here we are. Look at what we are capable of doing.
Excellent. Let's move to Africa. There are a few things coming up in Africa, and then we'll go back to Europe on this point. So, a couple of weeks ago, the World Bank released a report, which was the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Report. And in that report, they raised some quite significant points in the sense that they say that income gains are likely to come from measures that cut red tape and simplify customs procedures. Tariff liberalization accompanied by a reduction of non-tariff barriers such as quotas and rules of origin would boost income by 2.4%, equating to about 153 billion US dollars. Now, one interesting point on there, in the simulations that they put forward of the effect of this trade on the Africa region, wages by skill shows that West Africa would be the most disadvantaged by this trade agreement. So the first question is this: what do you think about this trade agreement as a whole, generally? And then speaking specifically to this fact that it looks like when it comes to the effect on wages for West Africans, we're not going to be doing as well off as other African regions, if we group them that way.
Well, upfront, let me say I'm not an admirer of the World Bank and what it represents. In his book From the Third World to the First World, Lee Kuan Yew, the first Prime Minister of Singapore, made reference to the fact that one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why he succeeded in developing Singapore that had no natural resources was because he rejected every report submitted to him or to the government of Singapore by the World Bank. So every report they rejected and went on their own steam. You say the World Bank is back singing the same tune. I'm glad you said no stimulation. If you look at all the conditionalities that they've put there, reduce for trade, everything amounts to trade liberalization. How can there be trade liberalization when you don't have parity in industrial production? How can there be? Everything by the World Bank is geared towards importation from the developed countries, and through lowering of tariffs, through reduction of import duties at the dock, you simply allow the economy of developing countries to be flooded by goods from the developing countries. Of course, this will have a negative impact on wages. It will have a negative impact on industrial development. Industrial development is different from economic development. Economic development can come through various factors and through various activities, but not through industrial development. In fact, it ends up destroying nascent industries. In West Africa, for example, nascent tire industries, which have been in existence since the 1940s and 1950s, have been destroyed through importation of cheap and at times inferior goods coming now from Asia. Textile industries, we probably had the largest volume of employers of skilled labor in at least Nigeria, had been destroyed through importation of cheap and inferior textiles from Asia. Even the ancillary production of cotton, which used to be exported raw out, had been destroyed. So how can the World Bank now not expect that the consequence of a free trade agreement among parties that don't have parities in economic, in industrial capacity will not lead to a reduction of wages? It's to be expected. So I'm not surprised by this report. And I have also been an opponent of the African Free Trade Agreement for the same reason, that until industrial capacity production reaches a sustainable level, you can't have a free trade agreement. It is an agreement amongst non-equals, and it's those who are more developed who will benefit, who will gain from such trade agreements.
Regarding the specific point on wage difference, one other thing the report highlights here is that even when we look at those results by gender, West Africa still appears to be worse off. Do you think that we're doing enough to encourage women to participate more fully in some of the developmental programs that we have within the African region?
We are going to, no, the answer really is no. Because in a way, in a lesser fair atmosphere, industrialists employ labor that is available. And there are really blocks, obstacles in the way of employing women in Africa in general, not just in West Africa. One is the cultural thing that is still there, that, women should stay at home and take care of children. The second is this tendency where there is scarcity of resources, to put more resources into educating men rather than spreading the resources to include women. So to that extent, there's no doubt that there is systemic, it may not be deliberate, but there is systemic discrimination against women. For an illustration, if there is a factory manufacturing batteries 200 miles away from, say, an area, the tendency is for men to uproot and go to that factory, while the women will remain behind in the village or in the towns where these factories are not located. There is simply the pressure on the women to stay put where they are. Of course, if the factories is where they are, then they will have opportunities. But even then, it will still not be equal opportunities, because more men tend to get educated and acquire skills than the women.
Thank you for that, Prof. There is
Well,
an interesting development in South Sudan, where clashes between soldiers and civilians during a disarmament exercise has led to the death of 127 people. Now, less than 10 years ago, that country was going through a civil war. Do you think that South Sudan should rethink this disarmament program? First question. And secondly, does the illegal proliferation of arms in the hands of civilians raise a major concerns for Africa compared to, say, for example, the United States, that gives its citizens the right to bear arms?
well, first question. When citizens prefer self-preservation, when they prefer to arm themselves to defend themselves, it's a failure of the state. Because under the doctrine of the social contract, one of the things citizens surrender to the state, apart from their freedom, some of their freedom, is security, protection. They surrender that to the state in exchange for the state protecting them. When the state fails to perform its own bargain, its own side of the social contract, and exposes them to deprivation, security deprivation, either by the security forces or by fellow civilians, then the civilians resort to arming themselves for self-protection. And to that extent, it is a sign of a failed state. And I'm not surprised because, during the Civil War and the communal clashes that followed the Civil War, the civilians suffered brutally at the hands of these same security forces, as well as from fellow human beings. So I'm not surprised that it's going to take time before you re-establish that social contract, before things become, before the minds of civilians are now at rest, that the state is now capable of protecting them. It will take time. And I think that the process of disarming the civilians is one that should be accompanied by a lot of sensitization, civil education, right from the village level up, that now the state can protect you. You don't need these weapons. Not only protect you from fellow civilians, but protect you from the state itself. What one has discovered is that even foreign agents, foreign businessmen also often fuel this militarization of the civilians in order to allow them to exploit the accompanying instability, to exploit the resources in particular countries. One knows about that a lot in the Congo because they were after the mineral resources. One knows that in northern Nigeria, where in some of the states where foreigners have been involved in illegal mining of gold or diamonds and what have you, they have actually encouraged communal instability because this has allowed them to exploit the economic resources. Now, the issue you raised about what's the difference between that and the United States, where civilians under the Constitution are allowed to carry arms. Let me state by the way that, by the side, that the interpretation by the Supreme Court in the United States that the Constitution now allows individuals to bear arms. In fact, a retired Chief Justice of the United States has said that that case was wrongly decided, that the constitutional right at a time when you were dealing with atomistic settlements cannot be transmitted to constitute rights in an organized society like the United States is. Nevertheless, there is no doubt that the arms available to American security forces, whether the state police, the National Guard, the Homeland Guard, and the military itself, you can't take on no group of civilians in the United States can take on the totality of the military paraphernalia of the United States. So you cannot equate both. Arms in the hands of civilians constitute a threat to stability in developing countries in a way in which it does not constitute a threat to a country like the United States.
All right. Moving on, there is a question here in terms of the recent developments in Europe and migrants crossing the English Channel. So we've had that story come up again in the press this week. Now, the question says, while we know the issue is not new, we know from information available in the UK House of Commons Library that in 2019, there was a sharp increase in the number of migrants crossing the channel compared to 2018. The UK government and the French government came up with a joint action plan. They even committed about £6 million to improving security across that border and making it better. Yet, we still have issues in that region. What do you think is causing this? And secondly, should nations be compelled to take such migrants in?
The reason why this question of illegal immigration is a perennial problem is because the issue has not been addressed properly. What causes people to leave home, to leave loved ones, to leave stability, to leave cultural affinity and embark on a journey where they risk their lives and a lot lose those lives to go into a country they don't know, a country probably where they don't speak the language. It has to be something so fundamental as to destabilize them, to make them forsake a rational existence and embark on an enterprise like this. And what is that thing? It is the fact that their own countries have been destabilized by, I'm sorry to say, agents of the developed country. We now know, and we've known this for a long time, that the so-called Arab Spring was engineered from abroad. There is no doubt that the Arabs, like everybody else, I love freedom. You love freedom, and that's why we're able to have this kind of program and talk. But to now transfer that into engineering armed conflict, at times with the active involvement of secret and special forces from abroad to destabilize the government, as it was done in Libya, leading to the assassination of Gaddafi. And after they succeeded in doing that, nothing was left behind. They packed up and went back home and now left the Libyans with a country totally destroyed. They attempted it in Syria. It had led to a civil war. People, the French, the Americans, the Russians, Turkey, Iran, none of them has denied arming different factions in that country. The invasion of Iraq, especially the second Iraq war, totally unjustified. The ongoing war in Afghanistan. These are the things that led people to leave their homes and seek safety, a better life abroad. So if you know you want to stop this issue of illegal immigrants, I think the citizens of Europe especially, and I'll tell you in a minute why I'm singling out Europe, the citizens of Europe must put pressure on their governments not to interfere and destabilize, even if governments in other areas are dictatorships. At times, dictatorships lead to peace and stability and prosperity. After all, how many millions have the Chinese pulled out of poverty into economic prosperity? And it's not a democratic country. When the Soviet Union, when it was Soviet Union, was being ruled by the Communist Party, the oligarchs did not have the opportunity to loot the treasury and the commonwealth of the Russians and ship this money abroad to buy property. As the parliamentary report on Russian intervention in British politics showed. So stop interfering in the internal affairs of especially developing countries. Stop sponsoring insurrection in those countries. If people want freedom, let them fight for their freedom by themselves. Don't engineer it. And once it has started, don't support one faction against the other. And if you are going to do so, then go full hilt. Wherever you are supporting, go full hilt, so that at least there will be actual victory. And that victory will then be accompanied by stability and development. But a situation where different countries arm different factions, never strong enough to be able to overcome each other, you are then inviting this flow of illegal immigrants as people leave and seek safety in Europe. The reason I'm saying European citizens should take the lead is the United States is so safe and secure from the Middle East, from Afghanistan. Yes, it has problems with South America and with Latin America. But the United States is so large that it's been able to cope with the inflow of illegal immigrants until Trump started making a song and dance about illegal immigrants simply for the sake of politics. The United States itself is a nation of immigrants, some legal, some illegal. So citizens in Europe do have a responsibility to put pressure on their government to stop nefarious activities in developing countries. Lastly, European governments themselves need to take a good look at the consequence of poverty by the activities of European companies in developing countries. because these activities often leave poverty behind and millions, if not billions, in the bank accounts of companies trading in these places. I'm not saying, I'm not anti-capitalism. I think that there should be fair wages for fair labor. There should be fair profit for fair investment. But when you invest $1 and you come out with $10 million, there's nothing fair about that. You are simply leaving poverty behind. And when people want to escape poverty, they become illegal immigrants. You are then faced with the consequences of that. And if European governments will appreciate this fact, then they will do something about the unfair and pernicious profits that their companies make in these developing countries. Again, I will make reference to the parliamentary report, which says that it is because of the oligarch money flowing into British property market in Britain that Britain has tended to turn a blind eye on the activities of Russia itself in terms of interference in the internal affairs and the political affairs of Britain. So to
But
me, address those two issues and you will see a decrease in the flow of immigrants.
but Prof, um, before we leave this topic, because there are a few points here on YouTube that I'd like you to respond to, but some people say this, that why do these migrants not go to neighboring countries? Why do they cross country after country after country and always make Europe the destination?
Well, because Euro, as if you listen carefully to what I said earlier on, it is the European countries who are agents of destabilization of their own country, and they see that Europe is stable, Europe is prosperous. What's the point of living an unstable country only to go to a neighboring country? In a way, that is a theoretical answer. Because in fact, take Afghanistan. I understand there are about 4 million Afghan immigrants in Pakistan, in India, in the neighboring countries. I understand, for example, that France takes in 4 times more illegal immigrants than cross over to Britain. So it's not as if these countries who are neighbors are spared. But I get the point that you are making. But all I'm then saying is the capacity to absorb these immigrants vary from country to country. And I'm now saying that added on to that is who caused the instability in the first place? Who did? In fact, it is probably Chancellor Merkel who should be praised because Germany opposed what was happening in Syria and in Libya. She opposed the interventionist policies that European countries have backed upon. And yet she's the one who threw open Germany to millions of these immigrants. Much to, she paid the cost for it in terms of loss of electoral support amongst the Germans because of her policy. But she did object to, I think, in fact, France was probably the worst culprit in terms of what happened in Libya and also was involved in what happened in Syria. But the Americans were also involved in Syria. Turkey was, the Russians were, Iran was. You never know what Israel gets up to because everything is done hush hush.
Thank you for that, Prof. We've run out of time today, but in the 1 minute that we've got left, there are some points here on YouTube that I think we should respond to. And what I would say to this viewer on YouTube that put this point on, you want to know the stance on of Black nations in light of racial frictions in the U.S. And you also want to know how vocal we ought to be. Ghana, for example, you said, has had a year of return cutting the diaspora. Now, the Prof has already answered that question. If you check on our YouTube channel, there is a link specifically that speaks to that point. If you check on that, you will see what his response is to your question. Thank you very much for asking that question. And there's a last question here that says, does democracy make a nation weak in the international system compared to military regimes when Nigeria was recognized in the international system with reputation as an African power?
I was expecting that. I thought sooner or later that will come up, that since I served under a military regime, is there a connection? But since you say we are running out of time, I'll be prepared to take that on. Maybe our first question next week.
Next week. Okay, we'll do that. We'll pick that next week as the starting question. And I want to thank you all for joining this evening. Those who have asked questions online, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Next week, we'll continue with the questions, and we deal with issues across all the different areas of the world: US, Europe, China, Africa. So please do join us. Do send your questions in. If you want to send the questions in early, do send those in, and we will pass them over to the Prof. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next week.